and we are excited tonight. Randy says I use that word so much, but I often am excited, and especially when I'm bringing folks together doing good work. So I'm glad that you could join us today. Theresa has just joined us. Hi, Theresa, good to see you. And so the Michigan Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Network does work around the state within our Unitarian Universalist congregations all over the state, including 3 in the Upper Peninsula. We also do interfaith work and intercommunity work with organizations and folks connected with our congregation. And I'm really excited to bring 3 folks together tonight. A couple who have done a lot of work together, Theresa and Jesse, but probably not as much as they would like to. And Tom, up from the Upper Peninsula, someone who's new to Michigan and a bit new to this particular Michigan environmental justice work. And I'm excited to bring them together. We're going to have a great conversation tonight. For those of you who joined us in person, there will be time for questions and discussion and hopefully learning from what you have to share with us as well. So I'm just going to start things off and give a very brief introduction to my friend Jesse, who I met doing environmental justice work in Detroit. We've known each other for a number of years. I can't even remember how many or exactly where we met. But instead of reading his bio that I will share with you following, because it's rich and important, I'm going to ask Jesse to just personally share who he is himself. I'm not going to put him too much on the spot. And this is not a those things called podcast. I've been listening to a couple great podcasts that start off with these "Who are you?" questions, and so I'm not going to go too deep, but I'm just going to say, who are you, and what brings you to this work? Welcome, Jesse.
CO, good day, y'all. Jesse James Deerenwater, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. I live, pronouns are he, him. I live in North Redford, Michigan on the Detroit line. I'm a member of Citizens Resistance at Fermi 2, CRAFT for short. We oppose the Fermi 2 reactor down in Monroe and work within that 50-mile radius, which includes Detroit, Windsor, Ann Arbor, and Toledo, and beyond. That's kind of like general who I am. What brought me to this work is also part of like who I am. The community I come from in Oklahoma had a uranium processing plant that is now a Superfund site that our community banded together to fight against. And my mom was actually a leader in that. And that was like kind of how my foot was like brought into the door. That and a lot of people in our community got sick during that time. And a lot of them are dead now and will never be able to fish or forage in that land again. So that's what brings me here. That work is like I just kind of picked up the torch from mom. She's getting older, and there's no one else doing it. And in my own perspective, I wasn't doing much better things in the world with my life. I mean, I'm stonemason, but you know what I mean? This work feels more valuable and more meaningful to me. And so, yeah, that's just like a little bit about who I am, what brings me here. Uh, but before I kind of like talk about like the work that I do and what we got going on with CRAFT here, I kind of like to would like to give a little perspective and context into what indigenous resistance to nuclear power and nuclear weapons, bombs, looks like, sounds like, and what it's rooted in. So I'm no historian, but I do like to know a little bit about history, right? You know, that way I can kind of know things that have played out over time, especially history pre-contact, what was going on over there on those lands. And so one of the things that we see it kind of rooted in is like a system of domination. Now, I'm not sure where exactly that spawned at, but it popped up a few thousand years ago somewhere where all these different like cultures, societies were kind of close to each other and they were like working for domination to dominate each other. And eventually one kind of like comes out on top, another one kind of like replaces that one, blah, blah, blah. I'll kind of fast forward it to Rome. Rome is key here because we still live in its shadow today. Uh, so like this has to do also with imperialism, wiping the earth clean of indigenous people that refuse to be subjugated, erasing like tons of beliefs and different things like that. And eventually Rome kind of like led after feudalism kind of led to like a nation state, the nation states. And ones like Portugal and Spain, Britain, the beginnings of capitalism actually come with like the beginnings of the nation states and the slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade. And so these things are all important because this is that system of domination still in control of one type of people wanting to dominate another based on their beliefs or lack of willingness to be oppressed or subjugated. And so after the nation state, you kind of get Great Britain, who eventually takes the reins on everything over here. But Great Britain wasn't the only thing. There's also like Spain and in Rome in the Roman Catholic Church, which kind of like brings us up to what happens here on Turtle Island and how things kind of like came to be where we're at now with the indigenous people. So I'm not sure if folks are familiar with the doctrine of discovery or terra nullius, but doctrine of discovery is like basically uh, all lands discovered are to be for Christian rule, and any like indigenous people, animals, things like that don't believe in like the Christian God or whatever it is. Uh, they have no power, they have no say, they have no nothing. They're like less than human, not even considered anything. And so Terra Nullius is like the no one's using the land, so we're going to take it. And so like since we're not considered humans, we can't be considered using the land or owning land. Even though we never really had this concept of owning land, it's being in relationship with it. Most indigenous people across the globe had that similar concept. And so those things kind of set it up to take away all the power from indigenous people, set it up for justification for the domination, genocide, all these other things that happened. I sure hope you all are aware of these different things that happened, and and I'm not like saying stuff that doesn't make sense to you all. But if not, whatever. I'm trying to just run through this because this is actually like a 2 hour talk condensed into 15 minutes. Trying to do here. All right. So anyway, you have genocide, settler colonialism that are happening. Settler colonialism is like where the development of colonies, people are settling in them, spreading. Uh, it's also genocide happening on different levels. Eventually, like time passes and Indians get moved to the reses in like the 17s, 18s, and early 1900s. Uh, uh, that kind of sets up another thing, which is like lots of like mineral extraction and different things like that happen after we're moved to the reses. We usually move to places that were deemed less desirable or didn't have things that were like good for the settlers or whatever it is. So like later on, they start finding like, oh shit, well a lot of these lands have like minerals, resources, and things like that in them. And so uh I'm just gonna jump ahead to the nuke era here, just the nuke era, the Manhattan projects, the bombs, and then what happens there is what we call nuclear colonialism, which is like, so you kind of thought that colonialism kind of already happened. You know what I mean? The settlers came, booted us onto the reses, this, that, and the other, genocided us, and left us with no power, still subjugating us and oppressing us. Uh, uh, Things like that. Well, nuclear colonialism kind of comes like during the Manhattan Project. So, for instance, I can use Los Alamos National Labs as an example. So, that's in Los Alamos, New Mexico, which is on the Pajarito Plateau, uh, which was home to various Pueblo peoples. During the time of the Manhattan Project, they had been forcibly kind of like moved there to live with other Pueblo people who already lived there on the Pajarito Plateau and in the valleys that surrounded it. So in comes the need for Los Alamos for like bomb developments. The science behind all this stuff is what's happening there. It's science behind the nuclear power, the nuclear bombs. A lot of stuff is happening there, and so with this nuclear colonialism, they wanted to build this Los Alamos place in a really high spot that had very few places in and out. And so this Pajarito Plateau is like the perfect place for it. It's like 7,000 foot elevation, in the highest spots where the town and some of the central labs are. And so in order to build that, they had to remove all the Pueblo people from that top of that plateau. And not only did they have to remove them from the top of the plateau, but they didn't want people living in the valleys that surrounded it. And so they moved all the Pueblos out of the valleys that surrounded it and created a giant a complex, which is actually part complex and part national monument. So if you've ever heard of the Bandelier National Monument, and if you've ever been there, you'll see that there are these holes in the sides of the plateau. There's all these remnants of people that lived there. They make it sound like it's an ancient site where people lived long ago and were not residing there whenever the nuclear colonialism of Los Alamos was happening. Well, that's a lie. That's misinformation. That's propaganda and that's deception because those Pueblos that lived there are now the Tewa, Tewa tribe or whatever it is at that Bandelier National Monument. Those are the people that were removed from there and moved down the way. And other Pueblo tribes absorbed other Pueblos that were in relation to them and taken out of there. So even up until like the 30s and 40s, colonialism here in the States was still happening, but it was happening under the premise of like national security, where they claimed eminent domain, where they booted Indians out, and then turned around. And today, most people don't even know that that Bandelier National Monument had people residing in it up until about like 70 or 80 years ago. So, sorry to take so long on that part. I just want to give a real good example of what nuclear colonialism is. Uh, so, yeah, so people have been resisting the nuclear age. Indigenous people have been voicing out against it and resisting it since like the beginning of the era. So that's just like a little bit of that kind of history. Uh, and so let me see here. Let me see where my time is. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and try to speed this up. All right. And so you have the uranium mining that the nuclear power requires in order to get the fuel. And so most of you may or may not know that in the Southwest and in other parts of the globe where there's lots of uranium mined, that there is no cleanup that's ever happened at these mines. And that I think there's like just in the Navajo Nation, there's like 1,000 empty mines, 500 permits and some permits have multiple sites in them, and so that's why there's like over 1,000 sites. Period. And none of those have ever been cleaned up. And another form of this nuclear colonialism is also like whenever the largest accidents that happened in the United States happened, and that was the Church Rock spill in 1979, where like a dam broke that was holding these uranium tailings and other parts of the uranium process in like a natural, it's not a natural dam, but you know they like have like a pond thing, and they push a bunch of dirt and stuff up against it and keeps the stuff from spilling out so they can hold it until they figure out what to do with it. There's tons of those around still. And so anyway, in 1979 this dam burst and spilt out like 50,000 tons of this like high level uranium milling and tailings waste into the Puerco River. And these little like offshoots in the area. And so one of these offshoots that like a little like run waterway spillway thing led to a community. This community, this Dene community, was still living in the traditional way in their hogans, making their clothes from natural fibers, using medicines and plants, and eating things from the land. And so when this spill happened, uh, like these folks can't safely harvest foods. They can't harvest the materials for their hogans, which are the houses. They can't. Their sheep became radioactive and dangerous and sick, and using the wool from the sheep was making them sick. They couldn't use the medicines to heal themselves because those too were also contaminated and consumed by radiation. And so they were forced to leave these areas. They were forced to begin to rely on Western ways, Western medicines, Western foods, all these different things. And a lot of these folks were never able to go back. Some have went back and braved it in order to like fight, for the cleanup for their people. And so that's another form of nuclear colonialism is the accidents, and also kind of like where I come from, where there's a Superfund site. We're never going to be able to go there and harvest these traditional medicines. There was a ceremonial site close to there too. That's like could never have anything done with it now because of that. And so like we like have to like not be able to like rely on our cultures, our traditional life ways, and we're forced to begin to rely on Western ways, you know what I mean? And Western Euro ways, the dominant society, whatever you want to call it, ways. And so we're still being colonized to this day through nuclear colonialism. And so, like, that's about the best I can do for that without going like too far into it. And so just kind of like fast forward uh, a little bit. I want to share this thing here real quick, and I can do just a couple minutes on that. Let's see here. Can you all see this? Oops, oops, oops. Oh my Lord. All right, so this is the nuclear fuel chain. So after the uranium mining kind of happens, uh, so nuclear fuel chain and waste, the waste is generated at every stage of nuclear production. And this is something a lot of folks don't know that when you turn your light switch on and your power is generated by nuclear, there's all these processes that it has gone through before it's got to your reactor to become, energy or whatever it is. And so you have the exploration of of uranium, and then there's these two different ways that they get the uranium ore from the rocks or the tailings, and it's through this in situ leach process, which is like where they like pour a bunch of where they pour a bunch of like this tailings inside of a thing. They pour like this muriatic acid or hydrochloric acid in it, and they leach out the ore, and then they drain that from the bottom, and they take the rocks, this waste rock that we have here in the screen, and they dump it back in the shafts and the holes that they dug it out of because it's considered low level radiation and waste. And sometimes it can even be repurposed into gravel for like roads and shit like that. So a lot of that stuff's happening. Pardon my French. I know this is like a thing, but anyway, and then it goes to a uranium processing plant and or a mill, depending on which process that it's gone through. And those leave the waste too. The waste solution is one of the things that we faced where we were at. They had it in holding ponds and injection wells. They also changed some of that waste and waste solution into depleted uranium for artillery shells that they went and used in Iraq. And this was at our factory there, our plant there in Oklahoma. And all that stuff was so radioactive after they used the depleted uranium that they left all the military equipment over there. It's still there to this day. It still like impacts the people there. You can like do a simple Google search on the depleted uranium effects on Iraq, and you'll see all the deformations and things like that on the people that were there. And then it goes to the conversion plant where it's beginning to convert it into the next stages of things. And these could be like hexafluoride, raffinate, which is like what they spray on fields. It could be used for made into different forms for fuel bundles for energy and for bomb stuff. And then you have the waste from that, which like talk about. There's not very many places for this waste. Low level waste comes here to Detroit in the area. I'm sure y'all are up on that. High level waste, there's nowhere for it to go besides White Mesa Mill in southern Ute country. So then you have the enrichment plant. Boom. The plant, the one we had there was like a processing conversion plant, and so it was like the trifecta of what was going on, and that was called the Kerr-McGee facility. If anyone wants to look any history of that. So anyway, you got the fabrication where they make the bomb stuff and the energy stuff, and then you get the nuclear power plant, which is where we're working on stuff right now here in Michigan, and that's the Fermi 2 nuclear reactor. All right, stop that. Yeah, that's the Fermi 2 nuclear reactor down in Monroe, Michigan, which is Mark 1 design, the same as the Fukushima reactor that melted down, which has like a bunch of design flaws. One person that we worked with from Beyond Nuclear was actually in Japan 6 months before the Fukushima meltdown as a part of the Mark Out Mark 1 reactors campaign that a bunch of engineers that were around during that time and activists and watchdogs have teamed up to they have kind of going on. And so some of the design flaws, actually one of the design flaws besides the high pressure coolant pumps, which is like some more technical stuff, uh the biggest design flaw, which is actually something that Kraft helped pressure to get fixed, is the backup diesel generators, which didn't kick on whenever the tsunami hit the Fukushima plant. And so a lot of folks just think that it was the tsunami alone that caused the meltdown. No, it was the tsunami hits the plant, knocks the power out. The backup diesel generators do not kick on, uh, forcing it to become unstable and then have a meltdown. So that's one of the design flaws. And after that, our group and other groups pressured DTE and the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to like close down all the Mark 1 reactors in the world and the country and Fermi 2 until they fixed these design flaws. And it didn't really happen, or whatever. I think a couple places might have put their Mark 1s on pause in the globe, but Fermi 2 and DTE definitely did not do that. And so after like FERC fined them like $375,000 and public pressure amounted, DTE was forced to fix the backup diesel generators. Uh, Less than like a year later, a giant swarm of mayflies hatch off of Lake Erie and land on the transformer at the Fermi 2 reactor and knock the power out to it. Luckily, the backup diesel generators kicked on because they worked, and so we avoided a freaking meltdown here in the Detroit area, like barely, kind of. But if it wasn't for those, the watchdogs and the people doing the things, that never would have been fixed anyway. And so that's one thing to highlight. And then fast forward, Fermi 2, spent fuel pond where all the fuel bundles go. The high level radioactive waste issue is big. There's nowhere for it to go. There's all this different stuff happening. Well, the Fermi 2 site, it's spent fuel pond where they keep all the used fuel. Is overpacked, and they're literally like having to store the old stuff uh outside of the reactor in dry cast. And so uh, a long story short is that nuclear is not clean. It's not renewable. It's not safe. Indigenous people have been voicing out against it and fighting it since the start. You know what I mean? Indigenous people who are on Turtle Island, South America, Africa, Kazakhstan is what I meant. Say Australia and all these different places. And so now there's a big push for nuclear, and they say that it's good for everything and this and that and the other, but it hasn't been good for us. It hasn't been good for the lands that we steward. It hasn't been good for communities across the globe, cancer rates. I mean, all these different things. And so, whenever they push nuclear, I would like everyone just to be aware of this and keep this in your mind. When you see someone pushing nuclear power, just know that it's literally silencing indigenous resistance and voices who have long opposed this and who have long spoken about the negative and harmful impacts, not only on us and our people, but the environment within which we are a part of. And I'll try and keep it at that because it's a lot of stuff I tried to condense in there, and I don't even know if I did a good job, but that's where I'd like to leave it for now.
You did an amazing job in that short amount of time, sharing so much of history, some things that many of us know, and I'm sure some things that all of us learn today as well. I really appreciate that perspective that you took, Jesse. I mentioned to you before we got started that I wanted to connect more with you on the work that Muschen's been doing with this web series called Decolonize Your Mind. And I'm like, we need to do a particular one just with you on this decolonization, right? So yeah, let's talk more about that, but I really appreciate your perspective. I have a couple questions and I'm sure people do too, but I first would like to bring Tom and Theresa into the conversation. Tom and Theresa, do you have any direct response or questions for Jesse?
Yeah, well, on the topic of nuclear, I know that people make cases that it's green energy, that it's not green energy, and that's a long conversation. But at the end of the day, the point that for me completely defeats nuclear energy is that even if a state or a country starts out with a nuclear plant for the sake of energy production, it's very, very easy to then translate that plant into weaponry production. It's not really a lot of steps you got to take to go from producing nuclear energy to producing nuclear warheads. And that's what happened when India started producing nuclear energy. In the very beginning, they said, we just want this for energy. And then a few years later, they have nuclear weapons. So it's an extremely slippery slope.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I sometimes lose track of the weapons part of it, though I do kind of loosely work in that realm. So yeah, I I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
And I just
The
want to say thank you to Jesse for that overview. And in the respects of talking about nuclear power and nuclear waste, and Jesse gave us a little bit of overview about who it impacts, right? It impacts the people, the native people, and the waters and the animal and plant life to they make it unusable, right? Well, nobody's talking about the impact of nuclear power on urban areas, the communities that are the recipients of that waste. Because I want to come in from that respect. We have to look at who is being impacted around these nuclear facilities and what permeates in the air. And so Jesse touched on it because when you talk about air, when you talk about water, when you talk about soil, those are the things that sustain us. And if they're contaminated, if they're polluted, what are they? They're harmful to human life. And that's why we're here today. We're here to talk about protecting Mother Earth as good stewards using clean energy, energy that is not just there for profit. And we know there's solutions. And so we're here to talk about the impacts on urban and rural areas. And what solutions can we talk about to help mitigate, to help rectify these brownfields and these Superfund sites. So I want to say thank you to Jesse for that.
Thank you.
oh,
We've
Yeah,
got a
thank you,
couple
Jesse.
appreciate it.
couple questions too. I see Larry, and then in the chat, Jesse, can you say anything more about Palisades?
Uh, yeah, I can. It's like one of the worst embrittled reactors that there are. The folks that are kind of advocating against it, are actually are saying uh, that restarting it. I mean, it is a bad move. Is a bad move in general, but the embrittlement is kind of like one of the things that makes it really dangerous because they don't think it can handle the restart. Also $2.4 billion already going to be sunk into it, and it's not even open yet. $2.4 billion is a lot of money that could literally jumpstart like a serious just transition here in Michigan. Just gonna put that out there, and I'll share this article too. And I'll take
Thank
the
you.
question.
Go ahead, Larry.
Hi, thank you, Jesse, for your thoughtful presentation of this. I agree that there are concerns about nuclear energy, but in my estimation, they are greatly outweighed by the problems caused by the fossil fuels that we are burning right now. The fossil fuels cause by virtue of air pollution, between 70 and 100,000 deaths in these countries right now. This is not possible future deaths. These are ongoing deaths. In addition, the fossil fuels are much more damaging to our environment, contributing to loss of species, to all sorts of health problems. And in my thinking, nuclear energy is not as clean as solar and wind, but it is better than the fossil fuels that dominate our energy use right now. Interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks for that question. That seems to be the go-to thing for folks that are for nuclear. So I'm glad to address that. So I'm assuming that you're mainly coming from the carbon perspective on that and not necessarily the halogens and all the other greenhouse gases.
Particulates are the worst of the pollutants for our health, and CO2 is the worst of the pollutants, also methane for our environment.
All right. Well, I'm pretty sure that that's probably what you read in different places, and that could be maybe potentially an overarching thing that folks say. But I know that like here in Detroit, and especially, you know what I mean, and well, I'm in North Redford, but I'm on the Detroit line. You know, I spend more time in Detroit than I do in other places, so I say that sometimes. Pardon me, Theresa, if you know what I mean. You know how it is. But yeah, like here, it's not just about carbon. You know, we have all these different. We have a ton of different things. Our industries are polluting us just as much as the fossil fuels, just as much as the oil and gas and coal plants are. So, and then that's some of the different perspectives that people say. And I kind of get upset at that because it sounds like that, you know, you didn't even take into consideration the things that I just said too, you know, and as you know, a person of like, you know, myself that comes from a very impacted community, I don't like speak on this stuff lightly. I'm not an activist, you know what I mean? I'm not like an academic or any of these things. You know, I speak from the heart. I speak from a personally impacted place. And I also speak from a place that like I share with a lot of other folks. And so for you to say that it's your best, it's your thought, and that you have the overall judgment, you know what I mean, and the things that I just said don't even matter, kind of hurts me a little bit, but I'm not gonna like speak from a place of pain on that. I'm gonna speak from the place that says that there's more than just carbon that's hitting us. You know, we got white supremacy, we have settler colonialism, you know, we have oppression, we have these systems of domination that are still in place where indigenous voices are just brushed aside for, you know, your, you know, not just you, but folks like you and others who just say, oh, it's my general thought that, you know, what you just said doesn't matter because I feel like this, that, and the other from what I've read. And so I would just like to say, just please open your mind up a little bit more to, or your heart, open your heart a little bit more, not the mind, because the mind can be bent and blown in different directions with the wind. Our heart usually keeps us rooted.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
May I respond to that? Jesse, I didn't say anything about the things you say not mattering or the communities you're concerned about not mattering. The opinions I expressed were not just my thoughts. They are scientifically supported. I'm a scientist. I'm a physician. I'd be happy to provide you with data on that.
Well, you know, I'm in meetings with the NRC all the time, the DOE all the time. I'm sure that, you know, their stuff that they say is just as you know, valuable as yours. And yeah, I mean, like, do you work with like the physicians for social responsibility? You know, like the different people that are doing the cancer studies around the reactors? Are you involved in any of that?
I've been a member of Physicians for Social Responsibility in the past, and I still support them. There's other organizations that I'm more involved with.
All right. All right, yeah. I mean, you know, I'm not here to bend anybody's arms. I'm just here to share this perspective and this work
Yeah.
that we do.
Well, let's agree I'll agree to thank you for sharing.
I'm going to be following up on some of those points in my presentation because a lot of people don't take into account that with let's say we hate fossil fuels because fossil fuels are very clearly contaminating and contributing greenhouse gases. But then we instead want to embrace nuclear power or solar or wind or lithium batteries, all of which requires massive amounts of mining, tremendous development projects that are destroying sensitive habitats, and they are all fueled by fossil fuels from the outset. So for example, to create a nuclear power plant or to create a battery or to create the copper wiring in an electric car, first you have to mine the copper. Then you got to transport the copper. I'm using copper as one example. Then you've got to smelt it and process it, transport it again, manufacture it, transport it again, decommission it, recycle it. And every single step is fueled by fossil fuels. So
Yeah.
are we really replacing fossil fuels, or are we just adding new layers of energy production? That's the
Yeah.
larger conversation that we need to start having.
Yeah, I kind of cut out the transportation, you know what I mean, the amount of carbon involved with transportation, mining, and milling, and I didn't even get into the how the green revolution could be just as harmful as any of the other ones if we don't have a shift in consciousness.
Yeah, we have to get into the circular economy. A lot of the copper could be recycled. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't recycle that can be recycled. But I was going to talk to what as Larry said earlier. If we're spending billions of dollars, which is what we're doing, I think it's going to be $3 to $4 billion to reactivate Palisade. That money could be spent putting in solar, it could be spent putting in wind, it could be spent putting in the transmission system so that we can get more to the renewable. Radioactivity scares the shit out of me. I lived for 20 years in Colorado where they were fracking. And with fracking, you put a lot of water into the wells. And when that water comes out of the wells, it's radioactive. People were getting sick with cancer everywhere these wells were going. And you could see the reaction from the people. In one town, the damn cats, the wild cats, were no longer breeding. Radioactivity is one of the scariest things as far as I'm concerned. And if we put in nuclear plants, we have not solved the problem of radioactivity. Mining uranium is a lot more dangerous than mining lithium. And again, lithium is recyclable once we get all of the factories in place to do it. The circular economy is one of the things we really have to be working to establish so that what we are taking out of the ground, we're using more and more and more instead of every time it's used, it gets, it's now been used, it's no good, it goes into a slag heap. So that's where I come from.
Thank you. I want to keep us moving because we've got a lot more information to share and learn from each other. I appreciate the conversation with Larry and Jesse, and maybe there's even time for more of that here or offline. I think that I'd like to move to Tom next, but before I do, Jesse, can you tell us about the win that you had recently with the work you're doing with craft?
Yeah, so it's not even necessarily about radioactivity. There's also impacts from just the everyday operations at Fermi. It uses 45 million gallons of water a day for its cooling processes. It uses that out of Swan Creek, dumps it into Lake Erie. That water doesn't come out like it went in. A lot of it's been let out with steam. But it dilutes the water that it uses with the waste that it dumps at a 10-to-1 ratio. So with that 45 million gallons of wastewater, there's 4.5 million gallons of waste a day going into Lake Erie. There's also thermal pollution, which is the heat that comes out in it. So we've known for a long time that the algae bloom that stays around the Fermi 2 reactor is related to it. Uh, uh, and we just kind of wanted to kind of like figure out how and different stuff like that. And so there's this National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit that Fermi 2 has. And within that is where they're allowed to dump all these different toxins and chemicals like lead, arsenic, phosphorus, It was PCBs, but we made them get it in writing that they weren't dumping that anymore since there's an international treaty ban on it. PFAS, PFOS, you know what I mean? You just like name it. There's over 200 like deadly toxins and like legacy and like forever chemicals that are coming out in the water. And then there's also like 100 and something radioactive elements, including tritium, that come out in the water too, daily. And so we worked with University of Cal Berkeley, UD Mercy, University of Vermont environmental law schools to dissect the permits, see what's actually going on in it. And there are some bad findings in there, like everything we thought, what I mean, was true. And there's lines that connected everything. So we challenged the permitting process a little bit. We wanted to kind of like test the waters on it, see what, see what we could do with what we found. And so we put some work into it, and we had some demands. We asked for a public hearing. We had a bunch of people show up for the public hearing. It was really funny because DTE and industry people sent some folks too, and it was really weird. Their comments didn't have anything to do with what we were talking about. You could tell they were just like, just repping the industry or repping DTE, which is usually how it goes. The folks come out and they say something that doesn't really like affiliate or associate with what. But anyway, yeah. And so some of the things we asked for were reductions in like the amount of copper and phosphorus that are dumped. 'Cause it's like 36 tons a day. It's something ridiculous, man. Freaking yeah, it's like really ridiculous. And so we're asking for them to like lower these different chemicals, have it in writing that they'll stop, that they're not dumping PCBs anymore, and put thermal limits on the freaking plant, man, because the western basin of Lake Erie is already like in bad shape. You know what I mean? Lake Erie is considered an impaired waterway, and it's like the oldest of the Great Lakes. It's literally the grandmother of the Great Lakes. And so it's like poisoning the grandmother too at the same time. And so anyway, yeah, we asked for all that. We got a bunch of stuff. We got like the limits that they're going to monitor and run as the testing thing. They reduce the amount of water they use. They reduce the amount of phosphorus they use. They are dumped. They didn't reduce lead, arsenic, PFAS, spectrus, whatever. It's like a thing they spray in the tunnels to keep clams and zebra mussels from attaching to it, but it's like a really poisonous and deadly toxin or whatever. And so they didn't reduce any of that stuff, but the thermal limits for us were big because uh it's never happened here as far as that goes with like a reactor or whatever it is. And there's 6 reactors on the Great Lakes, and I think they all have like these limits, and Fermi's the only one that never had them. And so for us it's like helping, I mean, for us it was kind of a win because we did a challenge, we put some work in, and we went, and we did it. Unfortunately, we're not able to follow up on that and like do an actual like fucking or legal challenge because of capacity issues with our university law clinics. I guess that's why some folks raise money to keep on hand to pay, legal fees and stuff like that, which is probably something we should do. But so yeah, for us it's a win that we got those thermal limits, uh uh and that we now know they're not dumping the PCBs, even though they had until 2028 to stop. And we got the phosphorus reduced, and we got some of the water that they use. Now it's down to like 40 million gallons of water a day. It's still a 10-to-1 ratio, so it's still 4 million gallons of waste in the water that's going out into Lake Erie at a temperature that's above 19 degrees, or 19 degrees above the average temperature of the Western Basin. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a win for us. And there, there's lots of there's lots of other stuff that like we could go for too and say, but I'll leave it at that to give other folks time.
Thanks, Jesse. And yes, the
Yeah,
wins. The small wins are even wins. I think that
yeah,
they're just so important to recognize that so many of us in justice work and life, work and work and work, and things happen that we help to make happen, but then we got to move on to the next thing. We don't have time to talk and celebrate even the small things enough. And so I think that that's just really important. Before we move on, I just have to say I'm really glad that there were watchdogs and people like Kraft working on all of these things, and particularly got some joy when you shared about the mayflies and how the mayflies landed, and the mayflies themselves were like, we're gonna shut this down, like the resolve of them shutting down wouldn't have been good for us at that point. So I'm glad that there were people to get involved. But I love how nature shows up. Okay, I'd like to move forward, and we'll have some more time for questions and discussions after Tom speaks, but I'd like to invite Tom. I learned about the work that Tom and folks are doing up in the Upper Peninsula near Wisconsin in the Porcupine Mountains, through some water protector folks I'm connected with, and was really surprised that we hadn't heard anything before. And I was particularly excited because the Unitarian Universalists have a congregation up in Houghton, Michigan. And as an organizer, I always try to think of things to involve our congregations in. And so I reached out to Tom, and I had a great phone conversation with Tom about all kinds of things. And I'm excited that he is here, and he will introduce himself and share a little bit about what brings him to this work. And I just want to, as I said to him on the phone, welcome him to Michigan. And I just think he came and decided to make his home in just the right place at just the right time to see what was going on, because it sounds like if he wasn't there, we may still not know about what was actually happening. Tom, please jump in. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm really enjoying this so far. I appreciate that people feel free to provide feedback and challenge each other on points. I personally highly value an open discourse. And, for me personally, speaking up about sulfide mining in the heart of what they call historic mining country, you got to be open to stepping on people's toes and not being afraid to answer some hard questions. So I hope to provide some food for thought today, and I invite anybody to question it and investigate it themselves. I really appreciated Jesse's conversation about the history of indigenous cultures and the colonization. And one thing that I think about often is, of course, in the Americas, there is a certain group that we call indigenous because they were here before the European settlers arrived, and they were living in a much more harmonious fashion for tens of thousands of years. Whereas when European settlers arrived, we've managed to trash the place pretty thoroughly in a handful of decades. However, what we often forget is that all Europeans and people of European descent, we are also indigenous and colonized. What's happened is that we've lost track of it because the conquest of our harmonious way of living with nature happened long ago. It happened centuries or millennia ago. And so we've forgotten that we were conquered. We've forgotten that there was another way of relating to nature, and we've been absorbed into this industrial civilization. And now we've become part of the oppressive class, even though we ourselves continue to be oppressed. And in some ways, more oppressed because we've forgotten everything that's happened. We've lost the link with our original cultures. Indigenous folks, they are still carrying on that lineage. They still remember the stories. They still have some of the practices. Most people descended from European settlers, we've lost all of those practices. And that's why we need to look to indigenous cultures for inspiration and wisdom. But we don't need to just rob their culture from them. We also have a very rich cultural legacy in Europe, and we can look further back and see how were people living before the Roman Empire, before the British Empire conquered them. I personally am from Irish and German and English and French descent, and there were thriving pagan indigenous communities there before they were all absorbed into Christian sort of modernist movement. So the reason I moved to the Upper Peninsula is kind of an extension of that story. I'm from Kansas City, which is a place with nice people, but it's at the heart of concrete and cornfields. And I grew up in a oasis in the middle of the city. My mom had a very beautiful garden, a wild garden, and I learned to connect with nature. I was a kind of person at 8 years old, wanted to save the rainforest, et cetera, and spent a lot of time traveling in other countries, visiting beautiful places. And then when I came back to the United States at the beginning of the COVID era, Kansas City just wasn't really cutting it for me. And so my partner and I, we started looking at maps of light pollution, of agricultural chemical pollution, of population density, We said we want to live near an old growth forest. We want to live near protected land. We want to live near a big body of water. And that's how we wound up in the Upper Peninsula. And we found a very beautiful location right next to Porcupine Mountain State Park, right next to Lake Superior, right next to the North Country Trail. And we naively thought that such a majestic area would be safe, that some places are too sacred to disturb. And we've learned that that is not the case. So I'm going to initiate a short presentation here. Well, I'll try to keep it short. I have a lot of slides, but I'm going to fly through them because I've done them a lot. But I do want you guys to know exactly where we're coming from here. So the events and the project we're going to talk about takes place in the heart of 1842 treaty territory. They call this ceded land. It was given by the native people to the colonizers, but they were forced to give it. So I think ceded is not really a great term there. However, the treaty states that they still maintain the right to hunt, fish, and gather as they have since time immemorial. And one interpretation of that is they need to be able to hunt, fish, and gather from land which is clean. And we're going to see why this Copperwood project is a threat to the cleanliness of that treaty territory. So first of all, we're talking about the juncture of Lake Superior, the largest freshwater sea on Earth, clean enough to drink from without filtration in most cases. I drink from Lake Superior every day. I don't, fill up a whole Nalgene and chug it down, but I'll take a few sips. So a clean body of water in this day and age is incredibly scarce. We're talking about Porcupine Mountain State Park, the largest wilderness area in mainland Michigan, largest old growth coniferous deciduous forest in the Midwest. And the Porkies were recently ranked as the most beautiful state park in the entire country. And we're also talking about the North Country Trail, the longest of all national hiking trails. And as well as Black River Harbor is another spectacular river and waterfalls to the west. So most people would look at this area, which currently has no power grid, no cell service, no real development of any kind, and they would ask, why isn't this area protected? Because the biggest risk to the health of the habitats in the Porkies and the North Country Trail and Black River Harbor is habitat fragmentation. So even if there's nothing really in the middle there, that needs to be a buffer zone to maintain the vibrancy of these other areas. Instead, the exact opposite is being proposed. This is the Copperwood mine, the proposed Copperwood mine, I should say, because nothing's there yet. Their mineral deposit overlaps with the most beautiful section of old growth in Porcupine Mountains State Park. They would actually seek to mine underneath the state park, and it would be the closest metallic sulfide mine to Lake Superior in history. And I'll talk a bit more about what metallic sulfide mining is. But first, when I say it's a copper mine, that's actually a misnomer because the Upper Peninsula is historic copper country, but copper mines in the past were 90%, 95% pure. The Copperwood mine is 1.45% copper. You see that bright red there? That's the highest copper, and that's around 2%. But they would actually seek to mine 100 feet from the lake and potentially beneath the lake itself if they receive the permits. And then because 98.55% of what they extract is not copper, that means it's waste. We were talking about nuclear waste earlier, but a lot of people don't realize all the waste that is produced from mining. We're talking about 30 million tons of mine waste, which contains arsenic, mercury, cadmium, lead. This waste facility would be 323 acres, which to visualize, that's 244 football fields over 20 feet taller than the Statue of Liberty from toes to torch tip. So this is a monolith of waste erected on topography sloping towards Lake Superior. It doesn't exist yet, and that's why our campaign is stepping up to make sure it never occurs. This is a model. So unfortunately, these waste facilities, they're called tailings disposal facilities, and they have a dam which contains the waste, similar to a water dam. And the same as dams in rivers, on occasion they burst. And so this was a model released by the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, showing exactly what a rupture at the Copperwood Dam would look like. And you see mine waste would flood into a creek here, and it would head north towards the lake. I'll skip ahead. And they have concluded that within 25 minutes, mine waste could reach Lake Superior, mine waste meters in depth. Other models show it flooding the Presque Isle River in through Porcupine Mountain State Park and again reaching Lake Superior. So moving on, that tailings disposal facility and a lot of other infrastructure would be right next to the North Country Trail, which stretches nearly 5,000 miles from North Dakota to Vermont. The good news, even though the Copperwood mine has most of its permits, they do not have the money to move forward. So you see their initial capital value is at 390 million. And this is probably not even taking inflation into account. So it's really much higher than that. And they've cited that they have around $30 million in the bank. So that they lack over 90% of their funding. They've been proposing this for 15 years and it hasn't moved forward. With or without permits, they can't put the first nail in the plank until they have a power grid, until they have cell service, until they have hundreds of millions of more dollars. And so part of what our campaign is doing is trying to build resistance, because when you have a large resistance movement against a project, investors are a lot more hesitant to give money, banks to give loans, and institutions to give grants. I'm going to skip over this in the interest of time. Just to give you a sense of what it's like running a campaign like this in the Western Upper Peninsula, here's the closest newspaper, the Wakefield Bessemer Pick and Axe. So if the newspaper is called the Pick and Axe, just think about what their perspective might be. And here's the headline: outside forces step up, fight against Copperwood, comma, our community. Outside forces are against our community. I live closer to the mine than anybody else. I'm hardly an outside force. We've got 45,000 signatures in our petition. Thousands of them come from Upper Peninsula residents. We meet weekly with folks from the immediate area in Gogebic County. And then I love that phrase, outside forces, because to go back to the indigenous perspective, all of us white folks are outside forces compared to the people who have been here for tens of thousands of years. And all of us humans are outside forces compared to the Porcupine Mountains and Lake Superior. So we really need to stop focusing on, who is inside, who is outside. We're talking about the protection of water. Water is what unites all of us. Water is actually 99% of the molecules in your body. I apologize for getting some background noise there. The internet is down at my place, so I'm here outside the Wakefield Library. On the topic of, the folks who were here before, this is a petroglyph that is currently undocumented in any public literature that we know of. And it is on a boulder directly adjacent to the Copperwood mine site. It appears to be a zigzag arrow. And here it is in relation to the tailings rupture model. You see it's a zigzag arrow pointing directly from Lake Superior to the massive waste facility holding 30 million tons of waste on downward sloping topography. We've reached out to the tribes, we've reached out to area archaeologists. We don't have anything conclusive on what it means or who made it, but it's certainly very fascinating that it's there. And so one event that is happening just 2 days from now, which is something of a climax for our campaign, is we are hosting the Gitchigaming Water Walk. Gitchigami is the Anishinaabe word for Lake Superior. And this water walk is a collaboration between our campaign and tribal nations. We're organizing with Bad River, the Menominee. There's going to be members from Keweenaw Indian community, the Little Traverse Bay Band, and other tribes as well. We're going to be walking 31 miles, carrying water from the Montreal River at the Michigan-Wisconsin state line, walking 31 miles through all of the main towns here in Gogebic County before turning north, walking past the mine site and delivering that water to the shore of Lake Superior. It's not a protest. This is a Native American ceremony in which we're honoring the connection to the water and the life forms in the land. We are expecting a reasonable turnout, and anybody who wants to make a road trip up and join us, you can find more at protecttheporkies.com. It's going to be a great event, and I'm also very excited for when it will be over so I can relax, because it's been quite a lot to organize. So I just added these slides to my presentation after the conversation earlier because I do want to provide some food for thought. This is not necessarily my perspective here, but it's something that needs to be a part of our conversation. So the fate of the Copperwood mine, ultimately, in large part, is going to depend on the price of copper. If it's sufficiently profitable to develop this mine, it'll happen despite any moral qualms. So what determines the price of copper is the demand for copper. And what is currently driving the demand for copper is projections for the new, quote, green energy economy. So already this is something of a crisis in the environmental movement, because I've just shown you what is no doubt an environmental catastrophe or an environmental atrocity in the making. I think we can all agree that that is not an appropriate place for mining. We would be opposing a Walmart if they wanted to build a Walmart there, but metallic sulfide mines are universally polluters of water. And yet they're doing it because they say we need the copper for clean energy. So we're kind of in a bind. And I just want to tease out some of the nuances in that conversation. Here we have the Michigan goal, 100% clean energy target set by Michigan. So there's a few things that we have to note there. First of all, 100% energy actually only refers to electricity. And electricity is only 20% of overall energy use. So there's no way that, for example, diesel transport is going to be replaced by green energy by 2029. And quite a large percentage of Michigan's overall energy use just simply can't be replaced by green energy. Electricity, which is what happens when you plug into your outlet, that is something that is more doable, but that's 20%. And then, so a couple other points here to tease out. Gets its energy from renewable sources like nuclear, solar, wind, etc. So the thing is, one question I want to pose is solar, wind, and nuclear really renewable, right? So the sun is renewable, certainly. The wind is renewable, but the technologies all come from minerals. Minerals are not renewable. In fact, minerals are actually less renewable than fossil fuels. They take far longer, almost infinitely longer to replenish than fossil fuels, which are a compression of organic matter. So the term renewable may refer to the origin of the energy, but it doesn't refer to the technologies. That's something we got to keep in mind. When we're looking at, and again, this is not, I don't have a stake in which is better, electric cars or conventional cars. People just need to be aware that electric cars have a far higher mineral demand, which means greatly expanded mining. Even with recycling and a circular economy, it's going to require greatly expanded mining, which will create those massive waste piles. It will create threats to water. It will create destruction of habitat. That's just simply a fact that we need to deal with. I'm going to skip over that one. Here's an example: sensitive ecosystems at risk from mine waste. Nearly a third of the world's tailings facilities. That's the Copperwood waste facility I was telling you about. Nearly a third are stored within or near protected conservation areas. So Copperwood would definitely be a case of mine waste being stored near a conservation area. Top Google engineers. This is not my perspective. This is simply a perspective that is out there. I know we have scientists in the crowd. These folks here being quoted are Stanford PhDs. Even if one were to electrify all of transport, industry, heating, and so on, so much renewable generation and balancing equipment would be needed to power it that astronomical new requirements for steel, concrete, copper, glass, carbon, fiber, neodymium, shipping, and haulage would appear. All of these things are made using mammoth amounts of energy. Far from achieving energy savings, which most plans for a renewable future rely on implicitly, we would wind up needing more energy, which would mean more vast renewable farms and more materials and energy to make and maintain them and so on. The scale of the building would be like nothing ever attempted by the human race. So these engineers at Google, they actually renounced their R&D project due to these concerns. And this one point I want to raise is we're talking about how to produce more energy, how to produce better energy. Where is the conversation that environmentalists back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s have been talking about of reducing our energy, reducing our consumption? That's gone out the window because it doesn't make money for massive corporations. Now it's all about how do we mine more, create more, make more waste, and make more energy. This is a slide from Max Wilbert's presentation to the Club of Rome, comparing fossil fuels and green energy technologies. And actually, every single point here is identical. So the extraction is the same. The production, they both require globalized industrial production processes requiring energy-intensive technologies. They both entail human rights violations, exploitation of labor worldwide. In terms of democracy, they are all technologies controlled by multinational corporations with massive capital required. The one thing that is different is pollution, right? So if you drive a gas vehicle or run a generator, you see the exhaust coming out of the exhaust pipe. With green technologies, you don't see that. It's invisible. But does that mean that the pollution isn't being created? You know, it's kind of like what we do with our trash. We say, if you go to a country like India, people say, oh, it's such a dirty country, there's trash everywhere. In fact, the United States produces far more trash. We just hide it, we bury it. We say out of sight, out of mind. The same thing with factory farming. Animal agriculture is atrocious. And that's why they don't want anyone to know where it happens, right? You get the finished product at the supermarket, at McDonald's, wherever, but they hide where all of the production takes place. Now the same thing is what's happening with the contamination produced by green technologies. One final point here that we should all be aware of is Jevons paradox. So this is really fascinating, and I didn't know about it until just recently, but William Stanley Jevons was, I think he was a Scottish engineer back in the 1800s, and he wrote a book called The Coal Question. And his premise was that as the steam engine was created and coal was burned more efficiently, clearly if you burn coal more efficiently, you should need less coal. But in fact, what happened was increased efficiency drove coal use much higher, not lower, because people just traveled twice as often, twice as far, or a business with energy savings from increased efficiency use those savings to grow the business and then use more energy. So when we're talking about adding new energy production like solar, wind, et cetera, or improving the efficiency of vehicles, it might not necessarily reduce energy production. It might actually lead to more energy production. This is also called the energy boomerang effect. Alternate energy production increases supply, thus lowering the cost and stimulating additional energy consumption and bringing us back to where we started, high demand and so-called insufficient supply. So one thought experiment for people. Which is better for the environment? A vehicle which gets 1 mile per gallon or a vehicle which gets 100 miles per gallon? Again, this is not something I'm attempting to impose on people, but let's just think about this. Intuitively, you would say, well, clearly you want a vehicle which gets 100 miles per gallon, right? But then think about it. If you got a vehicle which gets 1 mile per gallon, you're probably not going to drive it just to go to the Starbucks a half mile down the road or to take a fast trip to see your friend, right? Because it's going to cost you a lot of money. As vehicles become more efficient, car culture expands, which means roads expand, which means industrial civilization, human civilization sprawls further and further out into pristine natural areas. So when we're talking about which is better, you know, fossil fuel vehicles or electric vehicles, that's like asking, to me, would you want a Coke or a Pepsi? They are both perpetuations of car culture, and electric vehicles to some extent may be an expansion of car culture. I'm much more interested in the conversation, how do we subsidize people to take more public transport, to ride their bikes, to actually travel less, not more? I'm wrapping up here. I'll skip this. All right, here's something that's meant to be very, very provocative. Don't take it literally. But we use these words green a lot, and carbon neutral, and climate change. And I just want to pose the question, are these actually environmental concerns necessarily? Because here you've got the green asteroid. This is a place where climate never changes, and it's 100% carbon neutral. But all of it has been done at the cost of the natural world. I'm not saying that is the inevitable resolution of the green transition. I'm just saying it needs to be part of the conversation, or it will happen. Because we've already shown that's what our civilization does. Our civilization is based on this illusion of infinite growth. There's no reason that's going to change now. We've just got a different set of corporations involved. So people can be, you can completely disagree with everything I just said, but you can still take a look at this map and you can say, you know, I think we need all the copper in the world, but this is still not an appropriate place for it to be happening, right next to old growth forests, right next to Lake Superior, a place that humans love, a place that has a unique ecosystem. So I'll end on that note. And I know you wanted to talk about some victories. Would you like me to do that now or have a bit of conversation first?
Sure, why don't you go ahead with that?
Right, so the first victory is that we have got people connected. We've got people engaged. We now have almost 10,000 followers on Instagram who are tuned into these conversations, and they're hearing things that they hadn't heard before, thinking thoughts they didn't have before. At the end of the day, whether Copperwood Mine is developed or not, that network is going to live on. So that's a huge victory in itself, is getting people engaged. Secondly, due to the conversation that we have forced into the media and into the narrative, the mining company now has to respond to concerns regarding light pollution and noise pollution. They say they're going to take light pollution and noise pollution reduction measures. I don't know how well you can reduce the noise of rock grinding and subterranean blasting. Regardless, we appreciate that they're talking about it. Still doesn't change the fact that they want to store 30 million tons of toxic waste in the closest of these facilities to Lake Superior in history and mine underneath Porcupine Mountain State Park. So that is a victory, but it's not a victory we're content with. More recently, the state of Michigan was actually considering granting $50 million of your taxpayer revenue to the Copperwood mine. Were you guys aware of that? That the state of Michigan was going to pay to mine underneath Porcupine Mountain State Park and store all this waste next to Lake Superior? Right. This was all going under the radar. We nearly didn't catch wind of it until a media article came out. We began organizing people to oppose this grant. It passed through the Michigan Strategic Fund, which is a group of unelected individuals appointed by the governor who vote on these, some are calling them corporate welfare handouts. Then it passed through the Michigan House Appropriations Committee, a vote of 21-5. The final stop was the Michigan Senate. We organized over 2,000 people, potentially thousands more than that, to reach out to their legislators. Other organizations reached out with us. This was not just us. This was done as a collaborative effort. At the very last second, the Michigan Senate decided not to pass the grant, and it was not included in the 2025 budget. And we've heard that it's not expected to revive. So that is a major win, because that money, not only would it have doubled the size of the company, but when you have an official Michigan endorsement, this is a Canadian company, by the way. So when you get an official Michigan endorsement, that's something you can wave around to investors, and then the money starts flowing in, and suddenly you've got the money you need to start a mine. So instead of getting that money, now that's a point in our favor. We can tell that Michigan actually thus far is choosing not to fund you, and that's why investors should think twice. So, and then our final victory is that, I think the term victory is, I've learned a lot from working with the indigenous communities in our water walk. After that grant was swept under the rug by the Senate, my first objective was, let's get people now to write to the investors and tell the investors what bad news is this for the company. One of the indigenous organizers that we were working with said, wow, that's such great news. We should extend gratitude to the senators who decided not to pass it. And that was just something that hadn't crossed my mind, extending gratitude. And it's also a form of activism, because, senators are used to, and politicians are used to people talking to them when they're angry. But when you talk to somebody when you're grateful, you say, you have my gratitude. Now that's something that these people have to lose. So it's like they're now indebted to you because they have their gratitude. So we organize hundreds of people to write to the senators and tell them, thank you so much for not giving our taxpayer money to a foreign extractive company who wants to ship Michigan's copper to Canada. So that brings us to where we all are now, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And congratulations on those wins. And thank you for naming the number of people following you on social media and the connections of people who are learning from you and engaging together. And I was feeling like that when I was putting together this web event too, bringing together even more across the state organizers on similar and different issues. And so that type of building is really important to me. There's a question from Nikki. Nikki, hold on one second for that. I also wanted to say that I really appreciate you pulling in the pieces at the end. And it was reminding me of a web event that Jesse did with us before that we called False Solutions. And I think it would be amazing to bring all three of you back again, and for that to be the primary conversation, to give more time to what I think is just really important, because there's so much to learn, and it's hard to learn, and it depends on who your sources are. And so bringing together the folks that are right there living in the spaces, doing the work, who are most impacted by it, to learn from, I think really helps to break down some of what we're we're hearing in other places, either if people just don't have enough information or if what they're learning is coming from the funders. So I appreciate that. Nikki, your question, you want to raise it yourself?
Yeah, the 1898 mining law. In Colorado, we had a problem trying to shut down a mine before it actually started. And we were told that the 1898 mining law precluded our being able to shut it down because this was national land. They had the right to mine. Is there anything like that here involved? Is in Michigan? Is there a right to mine kind of law that would preclude anybody from trying to stop them?
That's a good question, and this is the first time I've heard of the 1898 mining law, so I am going to look into that. I appreciate
Well,
you
as I
raising
said,
that
that's
point.
national. I would, but I don't
Yeah, well,
know.
so one thing is it depends very much on, are we talking federal land, state land, or private property?
Right.
Even though the Copperwood mine would want to mine underneath Porcupine Mountain State Park, which is state land, the mine itself is on private property. So they would actually be going underground because the state park.
Yeah, once you cross the line, it's the private property because if you're fracking, you're not allowed to go onto you can't frack onto private property unless you get the owner's permission, even though it's underground that it's happening. So they are going. Now they're going to go under Lake Superior, which is federal. They're going to go under Porcupine, which is state, and so I just didn't know if there was
any... So they have the surface rights in their private land, and they can mine in that private land. The state park does not own its own mineral rights. So the Keweenaw Land Association owns those mineral rights. Keweenaw Land Association has only 2 employees. They have a CEO and a secretary. So are they an association? I don't know, but they own over 400,000 acres of mineral rights, which is quite a lot of power for a company of 2 employees. And then they have to lease those mineral rights out, because if nothing happens in those mineral rights over the course of 20 years, it goes back to the surface rights owner. So they have the incentive to continually be leasing these rights out. So they lease to Highland Copper, the Canadian company who wants to start Copperwood. They are not currently permitted to mine underneath Porcupine Mountain State Park. They're currently only permitted to mine the private property, but they have expressed that is their plan, is to get those permits. Same with Lake Superior. They are not yet permitted to mine underneath Lake Superior. They're permitted to mine up to 100 feet from Lake Superior, but they have expressed that they would love to mine underneath Lake Superior because that's presumably where there's some really high grade copper. 2% is considered high grade in this case. So
the mining rights can't be used to stop mining because if you don't sell them within 20 years, they revert back. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is my understanding.
Wow. Okay.
Or even if they don't mine in 20 years, they can just lease them to somebody else. So you have to renew the lease.
Okay.
I'd like to invite Jesse and Theresa in if you have any response to what you heard or learned that Tom said, or connections, questions.
Well, I would like to transition because we're running out of time. We're only to 8:30. And so I had a presentation as well. So I just want to jump in and just move us towards another harm. We talked about copper mining and its impact on Lake Superior if it's allowed to happen. We talked about nuclear power and the waste and the radioactive challenge we would have with contamination. Well, I want to give a little bit of background. I am Theresa Landrum. I am a lifelong resident of Detroit. I am in this type of work not out of making it a career, out of necessity. I was drug into it. I was forced into it. In light that in my community, we have been deemed the most polluted zip code in the state of Michigan. We did that using the toxic lease inventory, CDC reports, information from, at the time, Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, and mapping and modeling from the University of Michigan School of Public Health with Dr. Paul Mohai and Dr. Byung Suk. And to give you a little bit of background, I am from a community that is predominantly African American. It's the most southern part of Detroit, leaving south on I-75, and it's the first part of Detroit coming north on I-75. Here in my community, we're surrounded by more than 42 major and minor polluting sources. But if you look at Southwest Detroit on a whole, we're surrounded by more than 150 polluting sources. These polluting sources, I focus mostly around air, but in latter years, I've had to encompass soil pollution as well as water pollution. Because as Jesse and Tom mentioned, we have cadmium, we have benzene, we have lead, we have mercury, we have sulfur dioxide, we have particulate matter. We have all these nasty things that are in our air. Now we're finding we have huge amounts of brownfields that are going untagged. In other words, unpronounced, unintroduced. Right now, we're in the midst of the completion of the Grotewohl Bridge, over 170 acres, which used to be factories that supported the automotive industry. And when the automotive industry had their downturn, these factories closed. And what they left us with was brownfields and legacy pollution. And we have been working with EGO and others to get the area declared a Superfund site, but to no avail. So to give you a little bit of background, we have to talk about, as Jesse and Tom mentioned, about colonization. Well, we also have to talk about slavery and what happened after slavery. After slavery, as you know, many African Americans and former slaves came north to seek better jobs and to run still from the oppression of slavery because it was continued in the South. So what was instituted was the Jim Crow laws by the states and the United States government. Also the banks, the mortgage companies, the real estate companies, Veteran Affairs, and others. With that came the inability for African Americans to purchase homes. So many of them, after the first wave of the Great Migration, which was after World War I, African Americans, as you know, came forward, to north for better jobs. After World War II, more African Americans came from the South from being sharecroppers and still, I would call it indentured servants. And under the Jim Crow laws, states still created an atmosphere that was oppression to African Americans and former slaves. And so we have to talk about systemic racism, institutionally, economically, socially, health-wise, and as any ism, it can fall up under systemic racism. We talk about what happened to African Americans when they came north. They were redlined into areas that were whites or more fluent people were not living in. So I had come from a community, we call it the Triple Cities of River Rouge, Ecorse, and Southwest Detroit 48217. The zip code, as I told you, is on the most southern tip of Detroit. It was annexed to the city of Detroit in 1922, the year my father was born. So the great offer of jobs came from, of course, Henry Ford, the automotive industry. So many of the African Americans settled in Ecorse, River Rouge, and Southwest Detroit, creating their own Mecca. We had our own Black hospital. I was born at a Black hospital. We had all Black doctors. We had all Black businesses. So we had our own Harlem Renaissance right here in Michigan, in the city of Detroit. It was not just Black Bottom. It was not just in New York. It was all over. So with that being said, came the point that African Americans were working in these automotive factories for a better life, and in which this area was rich because African Americans were allowed to purchase land. They couldn't get loans from the federal government. They couldn't get loans from the banks. But what was allowed was land contract sale. My parents came here in the 40s and they bought their house in the 40s. And our house is a brick home. And the people that used to occupy our home were Jewish. So in our community, used to be Polish, Jewish, Hungarian, and then, coming forth, African Americans. So I came from a rich community, but when I was growing up, what we did not understand that being surrounded by these industrial factories, that the brown air, the orange air, the black soot that we saw daily on our homes, on our cars, and on the, supposedly pristine snow in the winter, were the very fallouts and industrial pollution that was harming our health. We have a high rate of asthma. Matter of fact, we have the highest hospitalizations of asthma in the nation in the city of Detroit. Well, I just got a report today that we're number 3 in the nation for asthma cases. Our children are being born with asthma. So our children are being impacted in the womb. And we talk about the pollution of our waters and our lands being unusable. We cannot, in my opinion, grow gardens safely, because what goes up must come down. And Mother Nature does her job well. She rains the pollution out of the air into the soils. So if you got crops or gardens, what happens? The pollution is sucked up in the water and goes up in the plant. And so we've had a lot of soil testing. Matter of fact, it was a recent story on Channel 4 where they showed that Ballinger Park in River Rouge, a park that I attend for weddings and baby showers and to participate in picnics and watch the fireworks, the EPA just did a multi-million-dollar cleanup because it was so polluted. Guess where it was located? It was sandwiched in between the DTE Energy coal power plant that closed in 2021 and U.S. Steel, formerly Great Lakes Steel, that went idle in 2020. And what prompted this cleanup was they did a soil testing because of the impending demolition of that coal power plant to dismantle it, get rid of it. And they wanted to know how it would impact the park. Well, when they dug up the soil, they found it was so contaminated with lead, mercury, cadmium, and other things that they had to shut the park down. And they found this out in 2020. It was during COVID. 2022, I'm going to say, they did not reveal it publicly until 2023. So they allowed families and children to play on this contaminated soil. And you know what happens to a child when they're impacted by lead. So we don't know, hundreds and thousands of people have been impacted by poisoning of the soil, which Tom and which Jesse talked about. What happens later? So we're the later. We're the results of what happened. To talk about the Gordie Howe Bridge, as I told you, it's 170 acres. No one would, in my opinion, take the lead, not the Michigan Department of Resources, not Eagle, not the EPA, to say that this area should be declared a Superfund site and that it was contaminated. In the midst of the construction, they found, you heard the mention of PFAS. They had when you say PFAS, people relate it to water. Well, what about the land? What about the soil? They found heavy concentrations of PFAS in the Gordie Howe area. No one has come in and dug the soil up as they did in Ballinger Park and trucked it out. They allowed that Canadian company and country of Canada to start digging right there, exposing all within the area of Southwest Detroit and further to this contamination of particulate matter because of the dust. We're in an area where we're in non-attainment for sulfur dioxide and the bad ozone. Because we have the Ambassador Bridge, we have I-75 that runs directly through the middle of our bridge, through our community. And it was mentioned about eminent domain. Many of the homes were taken by eminent domain in the 50s and 60s for the building of I-75. So that's just a little bit of background. And I wanted to share my screen because we have a short time. This video is 16 minutes. I co-produced it. It's called Pollution Has No Boundaries. Okay, Jenny, how can I share sound? I want to share my screen, but I don't see where I can share my sound. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Let me know if you can hear the sound.
No. And I'm not techie. Oh, yeah. I think I was going to hear it if it was a little louder.
Hold on.
Yes.
And now the rest of them right now are just. I'm talking these MAGA folks out of their minds.
What's going on here?
Donald Trump actually
Let me get back to. Let me try to stop. I'm not techie either, so I'm trying to get back to it. Let me see. Let me stop sharing my screen. Sharing, where's stop?
What if you
share.
if you push back, will it work?
No, let me see how stop sharing. You know, I'm not techie, so I'll have to go out. I'll go out and come back in with that.
Okay.
And so let me see. I'm trying to stop sharing because I'm still sharing. It's not letting me do it. I hate this, you know, when you don't know what to do. Let me go. Okay, let me see. Stop share. Okay, let me try to go back in. You know, just pray for me. Exit full
Gotcha.
screen. Okay. Okay, let me stop that. Okay, let me go to screen share. Okay, Zoom. Okay, maybe we can get it now. Hopefully and prayerfully we can get it. Oh, come on. It's not letting me do it. I don't know how to work this, Jenny. My apologies.
That's okay. I don't either. So I'm giving you space and grace.
Yeah,
I think you can make it happen because it was almost there
yeah. I
before
got
the video changed.
Yeah.
Just take your time.
See, I got to get it so I can share it. I see it on my screen, but now I got to share and get it up on share. Can you
I
guys
see
see
it.
that?
There you
Yes.
go. There you
Okay,
go.
I hope I'm gonna try to press play to hope it happens.
And full screen it.
Yeah.
My family, along with many,
That's
many
great.
Nice.
the land of promise, the land of dreams, the land of where you could work and earn a living.
The influence of money in politics of corporations in Michigan is more profound than any other state.
Growing up, it was difficult to really grasp how dangerous it was in the area.
Why is environmental justice important?
According to Dr. Robert Bullard, environmental racism refers to any policy, practice, or directive that differentially affects or disadvantages individuals, groups, or communities based on race or color.
I am from the community of Southwest Detroit, Port 217. And this area that I come from and live in has been deemed the most polluted zip code in the state of Michigan due to the overabundance of more than, from what I've learned, 42 major and minor source polluting industries.
Environmental justice is critical to life on Earth. It's critical to our families. It's critical to our communities. Every person deserves a warm home and a safe community. Our kids deserve to grow up in a place where they feel like the air that they breathe isn't poisoning them.
There are cumulative and disproportionate impacts from a variety of pollution sources. This means that some communities are burdened by multiple pollution sources more than others. In our region, the areas particularly affected by the co-location of industrial and commercial transportation include Detroit's Delray neighborhood and greater Southwest Detroit, parts of Ecorse and River Rouge, and Southeast Dearborn. Of course, there are other neighborhoods throughout Detroit and nearby experiencing similar threats to environmental health and justice related to industry, legacy contamination, or hazardous waste sites, for instance.
I grew up with the norm of a foul odor in the air. I grew up with the norm of the air being dusty and coughing or sneezing because something has irritated me. One of the things I realized about 48217 Detroit was that people were not that familiar with the heavy industry that surrounded the Tri-Cities.
Primarily where I reside is the south end of Dearborn. The entire area, the little community that's there is surrounded by about 42 major and minor source pollutants. DTE, Marathon, AK Steel, which is now Cleveland Cliffs, formerly also Severstal, US Steel, Ford Rouge plant. These are the biggest offenders in our area. I think 3 of them, they're the state's biggest transgressors, are located in this specific area. My area of focus has always been that community because that's where I grew up. And that's where like all my family and residents and community is suffering from the issue of environmental injustice.
Growing up before the advancements in technology, simple air drying of clothing was not even safe. You would have that sulfuric smell.
There's no green. It's really, there's mounds and heaps of this, particulate matter. Right on the border of Canada, we were seeing 10, 13, 16,000 semi-trucks every day after the signing of NAFTA.
I grew up born in River Rouge, and every day I saw an orange colored sky. It either was orange or it was red. Every single day. But I didn't realize the impact until I was like in my 40s, and I developed asthma in my 20s, and I didn't understand what was happening with my body.
In addition to these threats, many of these same communities have also experienced exclusion from economic, employment, and educational opportunities for generations. Leaders must recognize that decisions about economic, environmental, and health policies are all related.
The easiest way to describe it is just racism, and it's a racism that's embedded and systemic. It's ingrained in the system. People are redlined into blocks, and then those blocks, they throw all these different companies into those blocks, and eventually you have environmental racism because now these people are being more negatively impacted than others.
Much of this region has been in non-attainment status or not met the Clean Air Act standards for sulfur dioxide for over a decade. And while there have been reductions in recent years, much more work is needed to reduce levels of SO2, as well as levels of ozone, black carbon, particulate matter, heavy metals, and other hazardous pollutants in the air.
When we're out of compliance and we're in non-attainment for air quality standards here, we can be in non-attainment for years. There's no penalty. There's no urgent timeline that anybody has because they're not here breathing the air in this community. There needs to be an accountable process that says, we recognize that these are the pollutants. We've got diesel emissions. We've got particulates in the air. We have sulfur dioxide in the air. What are the plans to get us into attainment in this community? How are we going to make sure that we're not subjecting people for, who knows how long to these pollutants?
Unfortunately, our state standards are very weak. There are many issues and lack of regulations that our state does not have to properly enforce proper environmental emissions. One of which is cumulative impact. So South Dearborn is a highly concentrated industrialized area. And when you have so many contributors to emissions, when a new source of emission is to be submitted to the state or the city, they don't take into account the existing environment. So that only adds to the problem that we already are trying to resolve. That is one of the biggest problems.
Permits to pollute continue to be issued.
Can you imagine for 40 years, we've been exposed to numerous chemicals without our knowledge? 8 people in one house having cancer and all dying and passing away from it. Now you can understand why we feel that our environment is having a serious impact on our lives.
About 8% of U.S. adults have asthma, whereas about 15 to 16% of adults in Detroit have asthma. The health effects and disparities related to air pollution are well known. Research links it to respiratory, cardiovascular, reproductive, and cognitive issues, as well as cancer and premature death. These lifelong health issues can also affect generations to come.
We had a health survey. So we were circulating the health survey. And if you completed the health survey and you said that either someone died in that home or had cancer, we would ask if they wanted to put a white cross in there in front of their home. And so that's what happened.
Growing up seeing it, it wasn't something that was weird, but you got like little hints of it from people that were outsiders. Those little instances, they raised red flags for me personally to see that, hey, you know, something's wrong. People don't normally live like this.
We know the detrimental impacts that burning coal has on human life. We know this. And they're going to close anyway, because really the powers to be know that we need to move from burning coal to cleaner energy. It's just a matter of how long will we carry these old ancient practices on.
I think environmental justice in Michigan and in Detroit in particular is about power. Who has it, who doesn't, who has the resources to fight back, who has the social capital and political capital to go to hearings, to, make the case, to be taken seriously when that case is made. Those are political questions. Those are questions about power and about influence, not about who knows the most about the issue. This is about building power, building solidarity so that we have more people, so that we have more power. And I think that Michigan is at the epicenter for that dynamic. When you have these forces converging in Michigan, you have a state where political power is so concentrated in the hands of people who can dole out a lot of money. And in Michigan, that is corporations, a lot of the times, who've been given tax cuts to locate in communities that are already overburdened.
There's some influence and power still in coal. When Trump was running for president, what did he say? He was going to save the coal industry.
For decades, resident activists and community groups in Metro Detroit have been fighting for the right to clean air, water, soil, and land. The fight has included work to enforce existing environmental protections, increase monitoring, and develop new policies and create new economies that could support the wealth and health of residents.
Even though there's study after study, health studies for decades have shown a link between diesel emissions and health diseases, this community had to take on its own studies to show that, in fact, the community suffers already from the traffic.
We are just lay people. We are not toxicologists. We're not biologists. We're not scientists. And we were able to discern from air samples that we conducted through using a 5-gallon drum, a vacuum cleaner, and plastic bags, sucking up the air. We sent them out to a lab in California. And when those results came back, it showed pollution here in this area.
Many grassroots neighborhood, community, and statewide campaigns have been launched to confront these issues in the fight for environmental justice. For instance, the Southwest Detroit Community Benefits Coalition, formed in 2008, a community elected board mobilizing to address the threats to community well-being with the pending international border crossing between the U.S. and Canada, which is currently under construction.
Welcome to the Gordie Howe International Bridge, the new gateway between Canada and the United States.
This bridge is landing in an area where we actually have the highest number of children, the highest concentration of children, and children under 5 in the entire city of Detroit. It's a very densely populated area. There are the least number of vacant homes than there are across the city, and it's a really vibrant life that people have here. Many of the people they work in the community too where they live, and it's a predominantly on one side of the freeway, predominantly Latino community. So people struggle with language barriers, and it's really important that we understand and we communicate with the families about these potential health impacts that are coming in the future. And we know how much families care primarily about their health. This project is landing right next to the I-75 freeway. Roadways that have over 10,000 vehicles on them a day have high roadway emissions. We did truck counts in the neighborhoods on streets, and we also did door-to-door health survey. And health studies show that residents living within 500 feet are more likely to die prematurely and more likely to have multiple health diseases. The impacts are well known, and yet the community had to take on its own study. And that's just an example where the laws just aren't protective enough for communities like this.
At the state level, the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition is mobilizing across communities with campaigns for climate and energy justice. Some devastating events have mainstreamed the concept of environmental racism and environmental justice. For instance, most people have heard about the Flint water crisis, but many people don't know that these injustices are playing out daily across our nation, and many don't know what they can do to address these issues.
The children, the adults, the seniors, they need somebody to fight for them. They need somebody to let them hear their voice, because our voice hasn't been here for a long time ago. We was like a lost city in the area. I became involved in what we call the toxic tours after Rhonda Anderson had asked the community, what do we know about pollution? What did we know about the dairy industries that we worked at, our family worked at? Had we ever really went to them to see just how they operate and what happens around them? The tour is important because it shows you up front to your face, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, how these industries are having a detrimental impact on the surrounding community.
As society must confront the impacts of climate change that are well underway, we'll all be affected and EJ issues will further magnify. We all must pay attention, hold elected officials and corporations accountable, and work towards policy solutions that prioritize those most impacted.
We'll continue to do what we've been doing for the past couple of decades, and that is right, so that we can change the system.
I really want people to imagine what the Detroit River and the River Rouge tributary looked like before colonization, before the clear cutting of our forests. Imagine what it looked like before fish kills, before PFAS and nuclear waste littered our shorelines. Imagine putting your fishing rod in a river and pulling out fish that was safe to eat. Imagine walking down the streets and feeling safe. That's the kind of future that we can recreate here, right, in Detroit and all over Michigan, really. But we need the political will of our decision makers to help us build an economy that regenerates Earth rather than exploits it.
Pollution has no boundaries. What impacts me impacts you and impacts us all.
Thank you, Theresa.
I'm trying to cut it off, so bear with me.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for putting together that video. That was informative. When you're ready, if you want to say anything else, let me know.
Okay, I'm trying to get it back off. Let me press escape and get back to you guys.
We can see you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to tell you what Jesse and Tom talked about. The way that we live now is being harmful to Mother Earth and to nature. And we are dealing with a climate crisis that is being pushed back on the back burner. We have no other place to go. Elon Musk, I tell people, has not colonized the moon. So where can we go if we have our rural areas polluted, if we have our urban areas polluted, if we have our air polluted, if we have our water polluted? Where can we go to survive? And what does it take, to understand that we're being sacrificed for corporate greed? We know there are alternative ways other than nuclear power, other than fracking and mining our natural resources that is destroying Mother Earth and polluting our waters and our air and our soil. So we have to understand that we have to come together. We know we were a capitalistic country. we're greedy people. But we can change that mindset by pulling all things together. You know, we talk about nuclear energy. We talk about hydrogen energy. We talk about coal power energy. We talk about other alternatives like wind turbine, solar, electrification. It's going to take a combination of them all. Even hydropower. We can build dams that can build electrical energy. But if we don't start now with protecting what we have, we're already behind the 8 ball. We're running a race against the end of what we call a clean environment. I do environmental justice work. I'm working on policy change. We've had a lot of victories. Just yesterday, however, we got notification that Marathon has now received its permit to pollute more. And in the ironic, Marathon workers are on strike for better work conditions, right? So in the past, we've had victories. We've shut down companies that wanted to come in and open up and use our tax dollars to repollute. We have 2 salt companies, which used to be Morton Salt was table salt, and the Detroit Salt Company, which is the roll salt. But now Morton Salt has shut down in Michigan, and the salt company has bought it. So we have that. People don't understand. We're on salt veins. So as mentioned by Tom, we have noise pollution, we have light pollution, and we have the truck traffic pollution that's deteriorating our roads. And as you heard Michelle talk about, we have more than 10,000, 16,000 trucks coming through our community daily. Well, guess what? That has increased exponentially since COVID. Because now the most sought after mode of transportation is truck traffic. Guess what? Truck traffic creates 80% of the greenhouse gases that is destroying our protective ozone. So we have to consider alternatives like biofuels, electrification, and other ways that we can create clean energy. We know it's not the cure-all, because you know what? Even with solar, what's going to happen with the waste after they retire those solar panels? And as Tom talked about, the mining of nickel, the mining of lithium, what it takes to create one lithium battery for a car. It takes mountaintop flattening. It takes destruction of the topography of our earth. So we have to, as humans, with all this ingenuity and genius we have, I'm sure we can come up with a combination that will arrest the impacts that we as humans have put on Mother Earth. And so I thank you for listening to me, and I thank Tom, and I thank Jesse, so that we can bring it all together, because you can see the beginning, the middle, and the end of what, as I co-produced this film because we needed a way to lift up the voice of impacted people. And if you look across America, our community, it mirrors hundreds of communities across the nation. We're the home to the only oil refinery in Michigan, and we're part of the largest oil refinery in the nation. And you know it. You got Cancer Alley in New York. You got the Manhattan Project, where now they want to bring radioactive waste to here to Wayne County, the counties that Jesse and I live in. Why are they taking it out of New York? Because it's banned in New York. But what they're doing is just transporting pollution from one place to another, right? Who is it going to harm? And they're talking about doing injection wells. Well, guess what? When they inject that radioactive water into those wells, water seeks the lowest level. So we have people that's still on well water, our surface water. It's going to lead to our fresh water sources, Lake St. Clair, which provides us water. So it's not going to only impact the United States and Mother Earth. It's going to impact the other nations, Canada. 86 million people use the Great Lakes on our end. But we are, 20% of the fresh water in our Great Lakes in the world? So we have to look at what's happening. So when you poison Lake Superior and you poison Lake St. Clair, who you're poisoning? You're not just poisoning the people, you're doing that. The very fish, the very things, the plant life that we use to sustain ourselves. So we have to look at this holistically. How can we be better stewards and stop the corporate greed from impacting human life? EPA, what's their mission? To protect human life, but it's not working. So I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to share with you a little bit of our stories and the activism that we're doing to help better life for all people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Theresa. So much information. And you touched on that just at your end, something that's always so striking to me that was also in your video about how pollution has no limits and there's that circle. And that's what I also just don't understand is that I guess on some level, I understand how some awful people decide to send all the pollution to the poorest neighborhoods. But I don't understand how they don't think it's not going to come back because all the air and all the water is all connected. And I don't understand. And I worked this summer. I've lived in Detroit all my life and I went to high school in Southwest Detroit, but it wasn't until this summer that I was working at a school just a few blocks from where Theresa lives and got to really be in that neighborhood every day and really get a little taste, a little smell, a little feeling of the devastation to the community, but also the heart of the community. That school is probably the favorite experience I've had teaching for 10 years. But the children and their families and the staff in the school are just this amazing community. And I met with Theresa and learned more history about her, learned more of her history growing up in that neighborhood and could understand why there's this beautiful culture there that people don't want to leave and people shouldn't have to leave. And their families have invested in those neighborhoods and those houses, and it shouldn't be them that have to leave. Even if they are able to. And so Theresa, I really appreciate you being here and doing all that you do and being the person you are. Theresa does toxic tours. If you're interested, I can connect you with her. We're already talking about something for the spring with our Ann Arbor congregation. And I think that it's similar to my experience. I haven't been on a toxic tour myself. I took myself a little bit driving around when I was over there this summer and took some photos and had some more questions for Theresa and got some information. But I think it's necessary even for me as a lifelong Detroiter and environmental justice advocate to go on a toxic tour. So let's talk more about that. It's 8:34. I want to end. I want to make a couple announcements before I do for those of you that are here and those that will follow in our video watching. This video has been recorded. As soon as it is uploaded to YouTube, I will share the link with those of you that have registered tonight and beyond. And I hope that you all will share it widely too, as you realize how much important information has been shared. I want to talk to our guest tonight about coming back and having a deeper dialogue around both false solutions and the scientific end of things, but also, as Jesse mentioned in his closing words on our chat, he had to dip out early and help with some things with his family, but he was also anticipating more of a spiritual dialogue and this interfaith conversation and with Unitarian Universalists and rights of nature and the spiritual aspect of caring for Mother Earth and Turtle Island and all of our brothers and sisters, I think could be rich dialogue too. The couple announcements I wanted to make, I wanted to remind you, Tom shared with us about the water walk that's coming up this weekend. I sure wish that I could get up there. If you are interested, but feeling like 30 miles is too long, you can walk with them for any amount of that time. Also, I wanted to share that the Unitarian Universalists are really interested and have been for a long time, are moving closer and closer to environmental justice as different from environmentalism, which many Unitarian Universalists have considered ourselves forever. And we are having a climate justice revival the last weekend in September, and excited to share that our president, Sophia Betancourt, will be speaking at our Ann Arbor congregation on that day, September 30th. We're really excited about that. And the day before, she and Rachel Mislivy will be leading a day of education and activities around climate justice at the Ann Arbor congregation. You can register for that online. That same weekend, the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition will be having an environmental justice C word conference Summit, I think it's called, in Highland Park, which is right in the middle of Detroit at Avalon Village, where they installed their first solar light. We learned more about that last week with Solidarity. So you can also register through that through MEJC's website. I also wanted to let you know about the Bioneers Conference that Anita Jones was here to share with us. Great Lakes Bioneers is going to be October 17th and 18th at U of D University. So that will be good stuff. She's also doing a lot of tours that she was encouraging folks to come to last week as part of that weekend. And I also just wanted to plug Mooshin, Michigan UU Social Justice Network. Randy Block founded this very small little organization many years ago, and it has become a statewide coalition with a board of directors and paid consultants, and a lot of exciting things happen here beyond environmental justice. We do racial justice, LGBTQ. We're doing a lot of voting, get out the vote work right now, women's advocacy. So good stuff happens with us, and we are in a membership campaign right now, 50 for Justice. We're trying to get 50 new members. You can learn about how to become a member or make a donation or get on our newsletter list at our website, uujustice.org, and learn about all the great things we're doing. And this web event, as well as past web events, will be posted. You can find it there, as well as how to get connected to all these great organizations that you heard about. If Jesse left and he left us a bunch of links, I will also make sure that all the links go into the information that you'll receive with this link. So thank you again. Any other final thoughts?
Just a thank you to all the speakers and people who are asking the good questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting this event and having all of these different perspectives together.
Yeah, thank you. This was very informative.
Thank you all. Yeah, I think so too. I think the questions and the diversity of knowledge and ideas are so important. There's not enough spaces anywhere anymore where people can get together and learn from each other just by communicating and sharing differences of opinion and knowledge. And we sure had a lot of knowledge in this room today. I'm also so grateful that our three guests know so much about their particular area that they're working in and the pieces that connect. So we'll let you all go, and it was great to have you. Good night.
Thank you. Night.
Good night.